"What are you doing? Go serve my guests." My sister snapped, her voice piercing through the elegant glasshouse restaurant. I am Gia, 27 years old, and I had paid for this entire VIP birthday dinner. Yet here I was being treated like a worthless maid. I firmly crossed my arms and refused to move. That rejection was unacceptable to her. Before I could even react, her hand shot out and twisted violently into my hair. She yanked my head back with her fingers digging into my scalp. With a vicious snarl, she forcefully slammed my face straight into a steaming bowl of hot seafood soup resting on the table. Scalding liquid splashed across my skin. A sharp, burning sensation ignited my cheeks and neck. I gasped for air while choking on the hot broth. I scrambled backward and clutched my stinging face as I pulled myself out of the bowl. For a few seconds, the entire private dining room fell into a suffocating silence. Nobody intervened. Then, a sickening sound of laughter erupted from her group of friends. They were mocking me and thoroughly enjoying the humiliation. But what they did not know was that this moment of cruelty would cost my sister absolutely everything. Just 15 minutes later, a single phone call would completely destroy her luxurious lifestyle and leave her unable to stand on her own 2 feet. But before we continue with this story, welcome to Revenge Mode. If you enjoy hearing about toxic people getting exactly what they deserve, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Make sure to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for your support, and now let us get into the story. A few hours before that horrifying event, I stood in the center of the rooftop glasshouse restaurant in Brooklyn. I checked the long dining table one last time. The space was exactly what I had reserved. The staff had arranged the silverware and the centerpieces according to my precise instructions. I had used my personal credit card to pay a large deposit to secure the $15,000 minimum spend for the private room. Today was the 29th birthday of my sister Hope. I wanted to give her a perfect dinner. I wanted to fix the distance that had grown between us over the past few years. I waited by the entrance. Hope arrived an hour and a half late. She did not walk in alone. Instead of the quiet family dinner we had planned, she marched through the glass doors with 6 uninvited friends trailing right behind her. They were loud and completely ignored the other patrons. Among them was her friend Luke. He was a tall man who immediately began pacing around the room with an arrogant swagger, acting like he owned the place. Hope did not apologize for her extreme tardiness. She did not even say hello or thank me for organizing the event. She walked straight past me and snapped her fingers at the restaurant manager who was standing nearby. "We need 6 more chairs right now," Hope demanded. She did not ask. She ordered. "Bring them to the main table and give me the premium wine list. Do not bring me the cheap stuff." The manager glanced at me since my name was on the reservation. I gave a small nod to authorize the change. Hope snatched the leather menu from the staff. She ordered 3 bottles of their most expensive vintage without even glancing at the prices. She did all of this with the absolute assumption that I would cover every single additional charge. She treated my bank account like it was her own personal fund. The staff quickly scrambled to accommodate her demands. They squeezed extra chairs around the table. Hope walked over and immediately took the seat of honor right in the center. It offered the best view of the city skyline. I stood near the end of the table and watched her settle into the chair while her friends gathered around her. She finally turned her attention to me. Her eyes scanned my outfit from top to bottom. She let out a loud scoff. "Are you seriously wearing that?" Hope asked. Her voice echoed across the room, ensuring her friends could hear every word. "It is my birthday party. You look like a boring old woman going to a corporate meeting. Could you not put in a little effort to look decent for my friends?" I looked down at my dress. It was a simple and elegant outfit appropriate for a fine dining restaurant. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Luke stepped forward. He stood right behind Hope and leaned against her chair. He let out a low chuckle. He looked me up and down with a brazen stare. "Maybe she does not know how to dress for a place like this," Luke said. He grinned at Hope. Not everyone belongs in a high-class restaurant. You should have taken her shopping first before bringing her out in public. Hope laughed loudly and nodded in agreement. She did not defend me against his insult. Instead, she gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of her hand. She turned to the rest of her friends who were now taking their seats around the expanded table. "Guys, this is my little sister," Hope announced. Her tone dripped with absolute disdain. "Do not mind her rigid attitude. She makes a little pocket change treating dogs and cats, and thinks she is rich now. She runs a local vet clinic. It is basically a place to clean up animal waste all day." The entire group erupted into laughter. They looked at me as if I were a complete joke. I had spent years studying and working hard to build my veterinary practice. I owned a highly successful clinic that I built from nothing. Yet she reduced all my hard work to cleaning up animal waste just to make herself look superior in front of a group of freeloaders. I frowned. My hands balled into tight fists at my sides. I wanted to cancel the extra orders and kick them out immediately. I felt the anger rising in my chest. But I looked at the custom birthday cake waiting on the side table. I took a deep breath and forced my hands to relax. I told myself to bite my tongue. I would endure this humiliation just for tonight. I wanted to keep the peace and let her have a good birthday. I silently walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table and sat down. When the expensive wine bottles were opened and everyone started eating, the restaurant staff moved quietly around the room serving the appetizers. Luke sat directly across from me. He completely ignored his food. Instead, he kept his eyes locked firmly on me. He stared with a heavy and highly uncomfortable gaze. He leaned forward over the table, closing the distance between us, and began making highly inappropriate remarks about my body. He spoke loudly enough for the people sitting next to him to hear. He smirked and made crude comments about my figure, questioning how someone who worked with animals all day could maintain such a shape. He deliberately raised his voice, seeking validation and laughter from the rest of the table. He asked intrusive questions about my personal life, demanding to know why I was still single, and laughed at his own offensive jokes. I felt a strong wave of disgust. I refused to engage with him. I kept my mouth shut, focused on my plate, and picked up my fork to eat in silence. However, my silence did not stop him. He seemed to take my lack of response as a challenge. He reached his hand across the table, sliding his arm past the centerpieces. He intentionally stretched out and tried to grab my hand resting near my water glass. His fingers brushed against my skin. I felt a chill of revulsion. I immediately yanked my hand back. I glared at him with pure anger. I firmly told him to keep his hands to himself and back off. Hope sat right at the center of the table. She had a perfectly clear view of the entire interaction. She saw him reaching for me. She heard his disrespectful comments. She noticed my obvious discomfort. Yet she did absolutely nothing to intervene. She did not defend her own sister. Instead, she let out a bright, amused laugh. She treated his blatant harassment as if it were a fun and entertaining joke. She looked at me, rolled her eyes, and let out a loud sigh. She told me to stop acting so sensitive. She told me to lighten up and just accept a compliment from a man. She then turned her attention back to her friends, dismissing my boundaries. The dinner progressed. The group of friends talked loudly and drank heavily. They quickly emptied their first glasses of wine. The waiters were currently busy serving another table at the far end of the private room. Hope noticed her empty glass. She tapped her fork against the crystal rim to get everyone's attention. The chatter around the table died down. She turned her head, locked her eyes on me, and pointed her finger directly at my face. She ordered me to stand up. She pointed at the heavy bottle of premium wine resting inside the ice bucket near my chair. She told me to pick it up and walk around the entire table to refill the glasses for every single one of her friends. She specifically instructed me to make sure Luke's glass was filled to the brim. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. I asked her why she could not simply wait a few minutes for the professional restaurant staff to return and do their job properly. Hope slammed her hand down on the table, making the silverware rattle. She glared at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered arrogance. She leaned forward, making sure every person in the room could hear her next words. "Today is my birthday." She snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. "Would it kill you to serve my friends for one night? You are just sitting there in the corner doing absolutely nothing anyway. Get up, take the bottle, and make yourself useful for once." The sheer entitlement in her voice was sickening. She fully expected me to act as a personal waitress for her and her uninvited guests. She wanted to humiliate me further after allowing that man to harass me. I looked her straight in the eyes. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice completely steady. I firmly shook my head. I told her absolutely not. I stated clearly that I was a guest at this dinner, not an employee of this establishment. I told her I would not pour a single drop of wine for anyone at that table, especially not for her friends. After delivering my refusal, I did not move a single muscle to stand up. I simply adjusted my posture, kept my back straight, and sat perfectly still in my chair. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and stared back at her with absolute defiance. The main courses were just brought to the table, and the loud noise of the drunken crowd echoed through the glass house. The waiters placed plates of steak and steaming bowls of seafood soup in front of each guest. The group of friends had consumed several bottles of wine by this point. Their voices grew obnoxiously loud, completely drowning out the soft background music of the restaurant. Luke sat across from me, his face flushed from the alcohol. He picked up his glass, which was filled to the brim with dark red wine. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He swayed on his feet, feigning a loss of balance. He took a heavy step around the table, moving directly toward my seat. He did not try to catch his footing. Instead, he leaned forward and deliberately flicked his wrist. He tipped his glass entirely in my direction. The dark red wine splashed heavily across the front of my light-colored dress. The cold liquid soaked instantly through the fabric, leaving a massive stain across my chest and lap. I gasped and jumped back, trying to shake the wine off my clothes. Luke did not step away. He did not grab a napkin to help. He did not show a single ounce of regret. He stood right next to my chair, looked down at the mess he had just created, and let out a loud, mocking laugh. His friends noticed the commotion and turned their heads. Instead of showing concern, they joined in with his crude laughter, finding the destruction of my clothing highly entertaining. I felt a massive surge of anger shoot through my veins. I grabbed a cloth napkin from the table and threw it down in frustration. I pushed my heavy wooden chair back so hard that it scraped loudly against the floor. I stood up and faced him directly. I pointed my finger straight at his chest. I told him to back away from me and demanded that he leave the area immediately. My voice was sharp and carried across the private dining room. Hope heard the commotion and immediately slammed her silverware down onto the table. She did not look at the massive wine stain on my dress. She did not reprimand Luke for his inappropriate behavior. Instead, she turned her furious gaze entirely on me. She stood up from her seat of honor, marched around the long table, and stepped right between Luke and me. She pointed her finger directly at my face. She loudly accused me of overreacting over a minor accident. She yelled that I was intentionally ruining the celebratory mood of her birthday party with my terrible attitude. She commanded me to lower my voice, bow my head, and apologize to Luke right then and there for causing an unnecessary scene. I stared at her, completely appalled by her twisted logic. I slapped her pointing finger away from my face. I stood my ground, keeping my posture straight and my head held high. I stated clearly and firmly that I would never apologize to a disrespectful person who had harassed me all evening and intentionally ruined my clothes. I did not lower my voice. I made sure every single person sitting at that table heard my absolute refusal. The room grew completely quiet. The friends stopped laughing and stared at us. My public defiance instantly shattered Hope's illusion of control. She felt deeply humiliated and lost face in front of her high society friends. Her face turned bright red with pure, unadulterated rage. "What are you doing?" she snapped, losing her mind over my disobedience. Before I could even blink, Hope lunged forward. Her hand shot out and twisted violently into my hair. She gripped a handful of my hair tightly and yanked my head back with immense force. I lost my balance and stumbled forward against the edge of the table. She gritted her teeth, took another step forward, and forcefully shoved my face straight down into the steaming bowl of seafood soup resting on the table in front of my chair. The scalding liquid splashed across my skin. The intense burning sensation shocked my system. I choked on the hot broth. In that exact moment, as the searing heat scorched my cheeks and the room remained entirely silent, the last remaining thread of my patience completely snapped. The illusion of our family bond was officially dead. As soon as the heavy doors of the private dining room slammed shut behind me, I walked down the hallway. I entered the restroom. The space was completely empty. I walked straight to the sinks. I reached out and quickly turned the metal knob. Cold water rushed out of the faucet. I cupped my hands and splashed the water onto my face. The icy liquid hit my burning skin. The sharp contrast shocked my system. I splashed my face 2 more times. I wanted to numb the stinging sensation spreading across my cheeks and forehead. I stood up straight and looked at my reflection in the large mirror above the sink. My skin was flushed and bright red from the heat of the soup. My hair was messy and several strands were plastered against my forehead. Dark red wine stained the entire front of my dress. I looked at myself, but I did not cry. There were absolutely no tears in my eyes. My breathing returned to normal. A strange sense of calm washed over me. My mind became completely cold and clear. I looked at the red marks on my face and realized the truth. The toxic bond between us was officially broken. Everything between my sister and me would permanently end right here. I would no longer accept her abuse. I reached for the dispenser and pulled out a few paper towels. I dabbed the water off my face, avoiding the tender skin. I tossed the wet paper into the trash can. I turned around and walked out of the restroom. I kept my posture completely straight. I walked down the corridor and stopped in front of the elevators. I pressed the down button and waited. The metal doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the main lobby on the ground floor. The elevator descended smoothly. The doors opened again. I stepped out into the spacious, brightly lit lobby of the building. I walked to a quiet corner near the glass windows. I pulled out my cell phone. I scrolled through my contacts. I pressed the call button to contact my father, Mr. Chester. I held the phone to my ear and listened to the dial tone. It rang twice before he picked up. "Gia, is everything all right?" Dad asked. His voice was deep and steady. I could hear a lot of background noise on his end. I heard the clinking of glasses, the low hum of hundreds of people talking, and soft jazz music playing. By pure coincidence, Dad was attending a major client conference tonight. The event was being held in the grand banquet hall located on the 2nd floor of this very same building. He was literally just a few floors away from me. "I am in the lobby," I said. My voice was completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "The lobby of this building. Why are you not upstairs at the dinner?" Dad asked. The background noise on his end shifted as if he was walking away from the crowd. I did not waste time crying or explaining the long details. I kept the conversation incredibly brief and direct. Hope just grabbed my hair and forcefully shoved my face into a boiling hot bowl of seafood soup in front of all her friends. I stated. The line went completely dead silent. The background noise of the conference faded away entirely. I could only hear his steady breathing through the speaker. The silence lasted for several long seconds. He was processing the information. He knew exactly what kind of person Hope was, but this crossed every single line. "Are you badly burned?" Dad asked. His tone dropped an octave. The warmth in his voice was completely gone, replaced by a dangerous, chilling authority. My face is red and stinging, but I do not need a hospital, I replied. Stay exactly where you are, Dad commanded. Do not move a single muscle. I am leaving this conference right now. I am coming down. He ended the call immediately. I lowered the phone from my ear. I slid the device back into my purse and snapped it shut. I stood by the glass window, kept my back straight, and looked out at the busy city streets below. I simply stood there and waited. Just 12 minutes after the call ended, the brass doors of the main lobby elevator slid open with a soft chime. Dad stepped out into the open space. He wore a dark tailored suit from his conference, but his tie was slightly loosened. His jaw was clenched tight. He walked with heavy, purposeful strides across the polished marble floor. He did not look at the hotel staff standing by the front desk. He did not glance at the decorative displays. His sharp eyes scanned the large area and immediately locked onto me, standing alone by the glass window. He closed the distance between us in mere seconds. He stopped right in front of me. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer empty words of comfort or ask me to explain the situation again. He simply reached out his large hand and gently tilted my chin up toward the ceiling lights. His eyes traced the bright red burn marks spreading across my cheeks and forehead. He looked at my messy hair still damp from the soup. He saw the massive dark red wine spill completely ruining the front of my light-colored dress. A muscle feathered in his jaw. His hands dropped to his sides and curled into tight fists. The sheer anger radiating from him was palpable. He released my chin. He gave a single curt nod. "Lead the way," Dad commanded. His voice was dangerously low. I turned around and walked back toward the elevator banks. He followed closely behind me, his footsteps heavy on the floor. We stepped into the empty cab. I pressed the button for the rooftop restaurant level. The ride up was completely silent. Neither of us spoke a single word. The digital numbers on the display ticked upward rapidly. The doors slid open to the rooftop level. We stepped out and walked down the carpeted corridor toward the private dining area. Even from the far end of the hallway, we could clearly hear the loud thumping bass of the restaurant's background music, mixed with the raucous noise coming from our VIP room. I did not knock. I placed my hands flat against the heavy wooden double doors and pushed them wide open. The scene inside the room had not changed at all. The expensive wine continued to flow freely. The group of uninvited guests sat comfortably around the large table eating the premium food I had secured with my deposit. Hope stood near the head of the table. She held a half-empty crystal glass of red wine in her right hand. She leaned casually against the back of her chair, completely relaxed and entirely unbothered by her violent actions. She swirled the dark liquid in her glass and laughed loudly at a joke Luke had just made. She raised her voice over the music, making sure every single one of her friends heard her bold declaration. "Just ignore her, guys," Hope announced, waving her free hand dismissively toward the doorway. "She is just throwing a little temper tantrum. She has always been overly dramatic about everything." Luke chuckled, cut a large piece of his steak and put it in his mouth. "You think she actually went home?" he asked while chewing. "Are you kidding me?" Hope scoffed, throwing her head back with a loud, arrogant laugh. "Of course not. She is probably just sulking in the bathroom right now, feeling sorry for herself. She will calm down eventually. In a little while, she will come walking right back through those doors. She will bring her purse, pull out her credit card, and pay the entire bill just like she always does. She knows her place." Her friends nodded in agreement. They raised their glasses to her, cheering to her supposed control over the situation and my wallet. They continued to mock my absence, entirely confident that they would face absolutely no consequences. Then Hope turned her head toward the entrance. She fully expected to see me standing there alone, ready to apologize and hand over my money. Instead, her eyes landed directly on the towering, authoritative figure of my father, standing right beside me at the threshold. The arrogant smile completely vanished from Hope's face. The crystal glass of wine in her hand tilted, almost spilling the dark liquid onto the floor. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The blood drained rapidly from her cheeks, leaving her face completely pale. Luke noticed her sudden change in expression. He stopped chewing his food and followed her gaze. The rest of the friends slowly turned their heads toward the open doorway. One by one, they fell completely silent. The loud, obnoxious chatter died instantly. Someone nervously cleared their throat. The heavy bass of the background music suddenly felt completely inadequate against the crushing, suffocating silence taking over the room. Dad stood firmly in the doorway, staring coldly at Hope. The loud atmosphere in the private dining room was instantly crushed. Dad stepped entirely into the room. His heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. He walked straight past the frozen friends. He stopped right in front of Hope. She lowered her wine glass. Her hand shook slightly, causing the red liquid to ripple. She opened her mouth to speak. She tried to force a casual greeting, but only a quiet stutter came out. Dad did not let her finish. He stared directly into her eyes. He spoke with a deep, authoritative voice that left absolutely no room for debate. "You have crossed the absolute final line tonight," Dad stated firmly. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. He dialed the direct number to his personal wealth manager right in front of her. He put the phone on speaker so everyone in the room could hear the conversation. He spoke clearly into the receiver. He ordered the immediate and permanent termination of her monthly allowance. He instructed the banker to completely revoke her access to his joint checking account. He then demanded the immediate deactivation of the supplementary platinum credit card she currently kept in her designer purse. The banker confirmed the requests on the other end of the line. Dad ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Hope turned completely pale. All the color drained from her face. She stepped back and bumped heavily against the edge of the dining table. She stammered frantically, trying to form a coherent sentence. She begged him to reconsider, claiming she had no other source of income, but she could not change his mind. He simply crossed his arms and looked away. I walked further into the room and stopped right beside Dad. I did not look at the uninvited guests. I kept my eyes locked solely on my sister. I noticed the shiny key fob resting right next to her dinner plate. It belonged to the luxury sports car currently parked down in the valet lot. I reached out across the table and quickly snatched the keys off the white tablecloth. Hope gasped loudly. She lunged forward across the table to grab them back. Her hand swiped through the empty air. I stepped back and held the keys tightly in my fist. I stared at her panicked face. I spoke with a loud, clear voice. I reminded her that the vehicle was completely financed under my name and my personal credit history. I paid the expensive monthly installments while she drove it around the city to show off. I told her that financial arrangement was officially over. I revoked her driving privileges effectively immediately. I stated she would never touch the steering wheel of that vehicle again. She shook her head rapidly in total disbelief. She finally found her voice and pleaded with me to stop. She claimed she needed the car for her daily life and had no other way to travel. I completely ignored her desperate pleas. I lowered my hand and slipped the heavy keys deep into my coat pocket. I turned my head toward the open doorway. I raised my hand and signaled for the restaurant manager to enter. Mr. Shaw walked into the private room holding a thick black leather folder containing the current receipt. He looked nervously at the extremely tense situation unfolding around the table. I addressed him with a calm and steady voice. I pointed out the large deposit I had already paid earlier this week using my personal credit card. I instructed Mr. Shaw to keep that exact amount. I told him it would perfectly cover the cost of the original reservation and my own portion of the meal. Then I pointed directly at the extra chairs squeezed around the table. I pointed at the half-eaten plates of expensive steak and the multiple empty premium wine bottles scattered across the white linen. I explicitly informed Mr. Shaw that I did not authorize those additional purchases. I absolutely refused to pay a single cent toward the massive outstanding balance generated by the 6 uninvited guests. I pointed my index finger straight at Hope. I told the manager that she was the one who specifically ordered the expensive items. I stated that she was now solely responsible for settling the remaining debt. Mr. Shaw nodded in understanding. He closed the black folder and walked directly toward Hope. He stood right next to her chair and politely asked her for a valid method of payment. As soon as the backs of my father and I disappeared behind the hallway, Mr. Shaw stepped forward and placed the heavy paper bill down on the center of the wooden dining table. The remaining balance for the uninvited guests and the premium alcohol sat right in front of Hope. The group of 6 friends watched the exchange with nervous expressions. They realized the financial disaster was completely real and entirely unavoidable. Luke stood up abruptly from his seat. He muttered a quick excuse about an emergency phone call. He turned around and hurried toward the exit without looking back. The rest of the friends instantly followed his cowardice. One by one, they grabbed their coats, slipped out of their chairs, and scurried away through the glass doors. They vanished into the elevator banks, abandoning Hope completely alone to face the consequences. Hope reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out her platinum credit card and handed it to Mr. Shaw with a trembling hand. The manager swiped the card through the wireless terminal. A loud, sharp beep echoed across the room. The small screen flashed red, displaying a clear error message. The card was officially declined due to the emergency account deactivation executed by my father minutes earlier. She pulled out a second card from her wallet and tried again. The terminal beeped a second time, flashing the exact same error message. She opened her small leather coin purse. She dumped the contents onto the table. A few crumpled paper bills fell out, totaling less than $50. It was nowhere near enough to cover the massive multi-thousand-dollar balance. Mr. Shaw crossed his arms over his chest. His expression hardened completely. He informed her with absolute seriousness that playing games would no longer work. He stated clearly that if the bill remained unpaid right at that moment, he would dial 911 immediately. He warned her that the New York Police Department would arrive shortly to arrest her for the criminal offense of theft of services and restaurant fraud. Panic consumed her entirely. Tears welled up in her eyes as the reality of a criminal record sank in. She frantically grabbed her cell phone and dialed numbers rapidly. She called multiple friends and acquaintances, begging each person on the line to wire her money immediately. Every single person hung up on her or rejected her desperate pleas. Cornered by the law, she handed over her expensive designer handbag and her luxury wristwatch to Mr. Shaw as collateral items to settle the immediate debt. 1 year later, my veterinary practice expanded successfully across the city. I opened 2 brand new regional branches, and my daily schedule remained packed with loyal clients who respected my hard work. Hope lived an entirely different reality. Stripped of her unearned wealth and comfort, she lost her apartment lease and moved into a tiny, rundown studio apartment on the far side of town. She worked long shifts as a low-wage waitress in a noisy diner, standing on her feet for hours every single day. She sold all her designer items to pay off her remaining debts and now relied entirely on public buses and subway trains to travel. We never spoke again. Our family bond remained permanently severed and no forgiveness was ever offered. Thank you so much for listening to this story to the very end. Please remember that sharing blood does not give anyone the right to abuse, manipulate, or degrade your dignity. True family respects your boundaries, and financial independence remains your most powerful shield against toxic people. What are your thoughts on how this situation was handled? Please leave your comments down below. Hit the subscribe button and join us next time for more stories on